The way you choose the sampling method and the way you choose the respondents that will be your sample is really important. Hi, welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome back to the Statistics for Economics class. In this meeting, we are going to discuss about the sampling methods. But before we talk about the sampling methods, first we should know about the target population. It is critical to the success of the research project to clearly define the target population. We have to rely on logic and judgment. The population should be defined in connection with the objectives of study. Before we go to the sampling methods, you should know some terms about the sampling methods terminology. First is an element. An element is an object on which a measurement is taken. A population is a collection of elements about which we wish to make an inference. Sampling unit. Sampling units are non-overlapping collections of elements from the population that cover the entire population. A sampling frame. A sampling frame is a list of sampling units. A sample. A sample is a collection of sampling units drawn from a sampling frame. Parameter. Numerical characteristic of a population. Statistics. Numerical characteristics of a sample. The deviation between an estimate from an ideal sample and the true population value is the sampling error. Almost always, the sampling frame does not match up perfectly with the target population, leading to errors of coverage. Non-response is probably the most serious of these errors. Arises in three ways. First, inability of the person responding to come up with the answer. Second, refusal to answer. And third, inability to contact the sampled element. These errors can be classified as due to the interviewer, respondent, instrument, or method or data collection. Interviewers have a direct and dramatic effect on the way a person responds to a question. Most people tend to side with the view apparently favored by the interviewer, especially if they are neutral. Friendly interviewers are more successful. In general, interviewers of the same gender, racial, and ethnic groups as those being interviewed are slightly more successful. Respondents. Respondents differ greatly in motivation to answer correctly and in ability to do so. Obtaining an honest response to sensitive questions is difficult. The basic error is recall bias, simply does not remember. Prestige bias, exaggerates to look better. Intentional deception, lying. Incorrect measurement, does not understand the units or definition. Let's talk about the census sample. A census study occurs if the entire population is very small or it is reasonable to include the entire population for other reasons. It is called a census sample because data is gathered on every member of the population. Then why we have to draw a sample? The population of interest is usually too large to attempt to survey all of its members. A carefully chosen sample can be used to represent the population. The sample reflects the characteristics of the population from which it is drawn. Basically, we have two methods of drawing sample. First is probability samples. The second is non-probability samples. The probability samples. Each member of the population has a known non-zero probability of being selected. Methods include random sampling, systematic sampling, and stratified sampling. The second one is non-probability samples. Non-probability samples. Members are selected from the population in some non-random manner. It includes convenience sampling, judgment sampling, quota sampling, and snowball sampling. First, let's talk about the most popular sampling methods in this world maybe, which is random sampling. Random sampling is the purest form of probability sampling. Each member of the population has an equal and known chance of being selected. When there are very large population, it is often difficult to identify every member of the population. So, the pool of available subjects becomes biased. You can use software such as Minitab to generate random numbers or to draw directly from the columns. So, don't be misunderstood about the random sampling. The random sampling is not simply you choose your own respondents based on your wants or your intention. It's not a random sampling. Instead of in random sampling, we still decide our sample before we make them, but in random ways, or we use some ways to choose the sample randomly. Systematic sampling. Systematic sampling is often used instead of random sampling. It is also called an nth name selection technique. After the required sample size has been calculated, every nth record is selected from a list of population members. As long as the list does not contain any hidden order, this sampling method is as good as the random sampling method. It is only advantage over the random sampling technique is simplicity and possibly cost effectiveness. Stratified sampling. Stratified sampling is commonly used probability method that is superior to random sampling because it reduces sampling error. A stratum is a subset of the population that share at least one common characteristic, such as males and females. Identify relevant stratums and their actual representation in the population. Random sampling is then used to select a sufficient number of subjects from each stratum. Stratified sampling is often used when one or more of the stratums in the population have a low incidence relative to the other stratums. Cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is a probability sample in which each sampling unit is a collection of elements. Effective under the following condition. A good sampling frame is not available or costly, while a frame listing clusters is easily obtained. The cost of obtaining observation increases as the distance separating the element increases. Example of clusters: city blocks, political or geographical, housing units, college students, hospital, illnesses, automobile, set of 4 tires. Well, now let's move to the non-probability sample. We go to the convenience sampling. Convenience sampling is used in exploratory research, where the researcher is interested in getting an inexpensive approximation. The sample is selected because they are convenient. It is a non-probability method, often used during preliminary research efforts to get an estimate without incurring the cost or time required to select a random sample. Judgment sampling is a common non-probability method. The sample is selected based upon judgment, an extension of convenience sampling. When using this method, the researcher must be confident that the chosen sample is truly representative of the entire population. Well, next is quota sampling. Quota sampling is the non-probability equivalent of stratified sampling. First, identify the stratum and their proportion as they are represented in the population. Second, convenience or judgment sampling is used to select the required number of subjects from each stratum. Do you know about snowball sampling? Snowball sampling is a special non-probability method used when the desired sample characteristic is rare. It may be extremely difficult or cost prohibitive to locate respondents in these situations. This technique relies on referrals from initial subjects to generate additional subjects. It lowers search cost, however, it introduces bias because the technique itself reduces the likelihood that the sample will represent a good cross-section from the population. As now you have known about the sampling methods, the next question is, how many respondents do you have to take for your research? Well, it's talking about the sample size. The more heterogeneous a population is, the larger the sample needs to be. It is also depend on topic. It is frequently it occurs. And for the probability sampling, the larger the sample size, the better. With non-probability samples, not generalizable regardless, still consider stability of results. Usually, to collect the data from all of the sample respondents, we use a questionnaire. Let's talk about the response rate. About 20 up to 30% usually return a questionnaire. Follow-up techniques could bring it up to about 50%. Still, response rates under 60 up to 70% challenge the integrity of the random sampling. How the survey is distributed can affect the quality of sampling. The way you choose the sampling method and the way you choose the respondents that will be your sample is really important. Why? Because if your sample is not representative and not the representation of your population, it can lead us to a misinformation, or it can lead us to a wrong conclusion of a research, and this will be a fatal.
And this will be fatal.
So that's why the way we collect the data is based on the way we draw on a sample, and that is very important to your research. If you are wrong in this stage, then your research in the future and also the conclusion of your research could be also wrong. And I also suggest you to print out the questionnaire or to share your questionnaire to more people than the people that's supposed to be your respondent. Because if we talk about the response rate before, not all your respondents will give you the feedback for the questionnaire, will answer all of your questionnaire. So to make it safer, you need to prepare the more respondents than your sample size. Well, later on, I will give you some case sample and I want you to decide what is the best sampling method to use based on that case. And please write down your answer in the comments below. Well, I think that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and also share this video if you think it is useful enough. So, thank you and see you.